So again, welcome to the space. I'm Noel Didla, and I am moderating this amazing panel of rock stars right here. And welcome to Tássia, Briggs, Jasmine, and Hakima. Thank you for saying yes to being here. There's a reason why each of you are here. There is, I would say, years of relationships at work that brought so many of you here, and I want to acknowledge that. And yeah, take deep breaths and let's get ready to be open, present, and connected to ourselves and each other and the purpose of this conversation, because we are really going to engage on interrogation. We're going to interrogate ourselves. So I'm gonna actually, or that's okay. Or I was gonna say a choice, who wants to go first, kinda. But this is gonna be a 2-minute storytelling that the panelists are gonna engage in to share about themselves and then their core values and their story of what brought them into this space, right? So that's what we are gonna start with, 2 minutes each. And then I have individual questions for them. So is that okay? Sounds good. All right, okay. Whoever wants to kick off, but I'm looking at Akima for some reason. All right.
Need a mic?
Do I need a mic? Can I go in here?
For the recording.
I'm so happy there's a recording.
Welcome, whoever is entering space, please bring your chairs and we can keep expanding the circle without making too much noise or,
But there's
you know.
also an empty seat here.
Oh yeah, that's right there. Ashwini, you can.
Otherwise I feel alone.
True. We can't leave you alone. There's a chair for you.
Thank you. So I'm Hakima. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm with the Black Feminist Fund. Your question, Noel, was?
Your story. Who are you, your values, and yeah.
Who am I? I am the granddaughter and daughter of displacement. My family is Egyptian. I was raised in a family of Black nationalists, Marxist-Leninists. I came through my political journey to anarchism and queer feminisms. And most of my work has been centered on supporting movements in different ways, mostly on the continent, but also in the Black diaspora and elsewhere. And I came to philanthropy, I want to say almost by accident, but not accident, as an intervention. We saw the ways in which Black feminist movements weren't supported and decided that we could make a little intervention in that space, despite it being a space where we know that our resources are being extracted.
Thank you. Jasmine?
All right, I'll go next. So good evening, everyone. I'm Jasmine Mickens. I am based in the Washington, D.C. office of Open Society Foundations. I've been with Open Society for 11 years, and if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, it would not have been working in philanthropy. And so I say that to say that when I started at OSF, it was just for like a summer internship that turned into my career of the past 11 years. Now, what brought me to the work around reparations? I have a very clear moment in about 2018 or 2019 when I was a graduate student at the time, and I took this course with a really amazing professor, and the course was Truth, Reconciliation, and the Politics of Truth Commissions. And I walked away from that course learning 3 things. 1 was that truth commissions are not enough. 2, symbolic political transitions aren't enough either. I won't say any countries. And 3, that reparations is the unfinished business of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. And so with that in mind, and being in the middle of my career at OSF, I was trying to understand, how do I bring these two worlds together? What I understand about reparations and what I understand about philanthropy. So fast forward, 2020 happened. The world is in shambles because you have the murder of George Floyd and a pandemic. And so I leaned into that moment in which philanthropy was now eager to listen to Black people within the foundation and outside of the foundation. And so that is where this journey began, to really explore reparations as a funding priority, but also to be critical of how philanthropy shows up in Black movements. So I'll stop there.
Right on time.
Ooh. Thank you.
This is how I announce my role as a timekeeper.
Briggs.
Hello. Comrade Briggs Bomba is the name. I see myself as a Pan-African freedom fighter. I currently serve as Director of Programs at Trust Africa. My role is mostly about helping read the moment and helping to develop responses, initiatives that can move forward the agenda of African liberation. As Trust Africa, we were founded on a big conceptual idea of centering African agents. So Africans can define their agenda, can lead the agenda, can resource their agenda for liberation, our development agenda. As part of that, we have been leading conversations on how to reframe the whole narrative around resourcing Africa's development and African philanthropy, centering on Ubuntu, solidarity, the traditions of giving, reciprocity, mutuality that are expressed in our African cultures, so that this is not a foreign, philanthropy is not a foreign thing. And thinking about philanthropy and resourcing beyond money, but also think of time, of talent, of networks, of just being there for each other and supporting each other. So in terms of values, community, we believe that whatever the question is, community is the answer. And that's how we are approaching even this question of reparations. How do we contribute to building a community, strengthening the community that can then collectively move us forward on this agenda?
I'm avoiding eye contact now.
All right, I'll pause there.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I wanna acknowledge and thank and ask permissions for the owners of this land, as I've come from Brazil. I wanna ask the ancestors' permissions to speak with you today. And I want to express my gratitude to all the organizations, to Reform Initiatives and Deep South Solidarity Fund and African Futures Lab for inviting me here. I want to acknowledge Noel, Macmead, Liliane, and Ellen, and everyone that put on the hard work for us to gather here today. As I was networking and getting to know people yesterday, a lot of them asked me, so you've came to Brazil just for this? And I said, yes. For me, this has been a transformative journey. This is my first time on the continent, and as I was leaving for the airport, my mother texted me. And she said, have a good trip, my girl. May God bless you, and may your time in Kenya be a happy one. The first of our family to return to the land of our ancestors. Enjoy it. As I made the 25-hour flight here, I had time, right? So I was reflecting upon this journey, and I was thinking about the 10 million African people who were kidnapped and who were enslaved across the Americas, and especially the 5 million of them who were taken to Brazil, the country where I was born. Brazil is the largest port of entry for enslaved Africans in the entire continent. Brazil was also the last country in Americas to abolish slavery, and we still feel its violence legacy to this day. I am a daughter of that land, and I come from a mixed-race Brazilian family, a typical one. I was raised in a roadside slum, just like the ones you have here in Nairobi. And I grew up hearing stories of working fields, cane plantations, violence, and migration. I also grew up surrounded by Afro-Brazilian instruments, rhythms, and culture. I am Tássia Mendonca. I am an anthropologist, a social scientist. I have been working with women's groups and civil society in Brazil for over 15 years now. And for the past 5 years, I've worked in philanthropy, mostly with Brazilian foundations. I wanted to know where the money came and how could we get more for our people and for our work. I've learned their practices, and I came to understand that my mission was to infiltrate those halls with dangerous and audacious ideas that can only be born in collective movement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause to panelists for introducing themselves in such beautiful ways? Thank you all so much. Hakima, back to you. So, yesterday when we were chatting, a few things came up, and one of the things was about Black feminisms and the relationship of Black feminisms to reparations in general. So, if you can touch upon that, Keeper, what do you think? How much time?
I won't take up too much time.
No, I'm just trying to get a sense of where we are, so. Yeah.
You stop me when you want.
I'm taking off the alarm. Let it just flow.
Let it just flow, okay. I think what we've heard over the last couple of days is that reparations is world-making. And what I mean by that is, if we repair the harms of these systems of oppression, then we overhaul them, which makes a new world. But reparations also reckon with the cost of what was done and is still being done to us by the institutions, individuals, territories, and with the cost of who we are and what we've become, and importantly, who we want to be. And in that way, reparations begins with us. So in terms of Black feminisms and reparations, when I think of patriarchy as a system of oppression, on this continent, patriarchy did exist before colonialism. We can't be romantic about that. We know that it existed. There's a researcher who was researching colonialism in Tanzania, and she was saying how there were many laws that were passed on African men's behavior, but they relied on African patriarchy to control women. So put that another way, as I see it, that means that patriarchal power in Africa didn't allow for a whole segment of African society to be freer, to fight colonialism, and to get us into a liberated space. And so when yesterday there was mention of Sankara and Cabral. Sankara taught us to dare to invent the future. And Cabral taught us that culture isn't static and that we must be thinking about revolutionary culture. And I think that's where Black feminisms come in. Today, how patriarchy shows up, especially again on the African continent, is very colonial. So I was listening to this African feminist Rosabelle Kagumire speak. She's awesome. And she was talking about the dress code laws in Uganda and Nigeria and this persistent attempt to criminalize the ways women show their bodies. And how deeply colonial that idea even is, especially in those countries where we never had those kinds of codes around our bodies. And again, if you read the ways in which the colonialists showed up in Africa, when they came to places like Senegal, they were freaked out by our gender fluidity, by our sexuality fluidity, and yet, over and over again in this moment, African patriarchy seeks to criminalize queer and trans bodies. Over and over again, ad nauseum, even those on the left. And that tells us again the ways in which this idea of binary masculinity embedded in whiteness has been so much taken up by us. And it leads to the same result, because in Ghana, for example, where I was living until recently, I remember the time Kamala Harris came from the US, and the African patriarchs were so excited that they had told her they could do whatever they want with the queers in their country. Meanwhile, the US controls a whole terminal at Kokota Airport, essentially having a military base, a foreign military base in Ghana. They also have put US administrators in the Ministry of Finance in Ghana, again, essentially administering our economies. And yet we claim victory because we told them what we can do with our queer folks. We're losing. We're losing because we're holding on to these patriarchal notions and these patriarchal systems. So for me, queering or re-queering Africa will be part of decolonizing it. And dismantling patriarchy. In doing so, African feminisms are reparative. I'll end there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, yes. Let's breathe what we are being offered. Let's breathe that in. Please, let's inhale it and exhale our good intentions to hold those truths. Coming to you, Jasmine. Assumptions around philanthropy. We were chatting about that yesterday. Assumptions that philanthropy has a role in movement, and assumptions that philanthropy has a role in reparations. And let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. Or you will unpack it for us.
Yeah, so I have mixed feelings about this question because I do think there's a role that philanthropy can play. And like my sister Tássia, as a Black person in philanthropy, my role is to ensure that I am leveraging resources in a way that is liberatory to the causes of Black people. So that's one element of it, as me being who I am. But I think beyond me, there's a bigger question of philanthropy in general. And I'm critical of the role of philanthropy. So my question to you is, do we assume that philanthropy is always playing a positive role in Black movements? And that question came to me when I, during grad school, just trying to understand what traditionally has been the role of philanthropy in Black movements, particularly in the US. And so I want to describe it as elite capture. And what I mean by that is the ways that philanthropy as a sector funds Black movements in ways that provide elite comfort and racial liberalism that fit a white liberal vision of progress and actually avoids direct confrontation with the systems of violence that continue to affect Black people. And by violence, I mean cultural violence, I mean direct violence, and I mean structural violence. So that element of elite capture is something that I think we always have to be aware of, because we're so focused on getting money to fund what we are trying to do that sometimes we don't understand the capture that's happening in that moment. I want to give you an example. So this is going to be US focused because that was the example that was really a turning point for me. So let's start with 1909, the NAACP. In the 1900s in America, Black people had one primary demand of their movements, and that was stop killing us. One thing, stop killing us. That was a pressing crisis because racial terror was really the defining aspect of being a Black person who had to walk the streets and worry about being lynched, a mob, or in the absence of legal protection. Like, there was no accountability for all the lynchings that Black people experienced during that time. And so for us, it was a matter of basic survival and citizenship. The ability to live was the fundamental precondition for us to be able to exercise any other rights, right? So that was our focus at that point in time. And when we had launched this campaign, I'm saying we as Black Americans, or I'll say the NAACP, when they were launching this campaign, funders were not interested in funding this. There was no money to keep that operation going. So you fast forward 10 years later, 1920, they received a grant from the Garland Fund, a white progressive organization, and their board viewed education as less confrontational and more aligned with elite comfort and elite sensibilities at that time. So their requirement for the NAACP in order to receive funding was to prioritize school desegregation litigation over anti-lynching activism. And in that moment, the entire center of gravity of the NAACP moved from grassroots protests and the direct confrontation that they wanted to have with racial violence to courtroom advocacy and legal strategy. Now, granted, it culminated in the landmark Supreme Court decision, which we know as Brown versus Board of Education. And this was a victory because it declared that racial segregation was not constitutional. That's it in a nutshell. But guess what happened? Black people never got protection from actually being killed. That never happened. So the US would celebrate school integration before lynching became a federal crime. Those were not Black people's priorities. But that was the trajectory that philanthropy reset for us. And so I think this is an important moment because guess what happens? That was in 1920. 100 years later, what happens? George Floyd. Literally, the unfinished business of something we tried to start in the 1900s comes full circle in the midst of the George Floyd protests. Mind you, in 1918, we had our first anti-lynching bill get presented to Congress. And they failed to pass that bill 200 times. And we eventually would get the anti-lynching bill in 2022. That was just 3 years ago. Okay, so I share that example because it's kind of a cautionary tale for how we think about what we're trading off sometime when we take funds from funders, especially progressive white foundations. And I won't get into like the next steps in terms of like what I think we need to be doing in this moment, because I can share that when we close out, but I think I want us to be mindful of this elite capture.
Sorry.
Thank you. I want us to be mindful of elite capture as we are really, this is movement building work that we're doing here. And I think that we just need to be prudent and use discernment in how we're negotiating the role of philanthropy in our spaces. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jasmine. That's a beautiful. That's right.
The unintentional mic drop.
Yeah, what a beautiful way to connect these dots as we are in Kenya to across different historical examples we have and how we are, that's very important for us to sit with in these moments. I really ask all of you to breathe that in, like these connections, and then release the energy around the intentions to build right relationships to each other and learn from these examples. So we are not making those mistakes, but building from experiences, right? Yeah. So Briggs, coming to you now. So question for you is, if you have to describe Trust Africa's work, and as Jasmine was saying, what did Black people consider as their agenda, and what was shaped to be their agenda by non-Black people, white people? So how would you talk about what you see as wins through Trust Africa?
Yeah, so I think our starting point is that philanthropy is not homogeneous. We emphasize the African philanthropy aspect of our identity. It's a whole different ballgame when you look at, philanthropy, classical versus African philanthropy, because as I said earlier, we are really looking at the expressions of mutuality, reciprocity, Ubuntu within our culture, within our communities. I am because you are. And the different ways in which giving is expressed in our communities. I think in Senegal, there's a community that when you give, the response when someone says thank you after you give is nyokobok, which says, don't mention it. What I give you is your share of what is in my possession. That's a poor paraphrasing of it, but there's a certain humbleness that is expressed, and there are, expressions of giving where, giving is done quietly. People, go at night and go and leave things where those in need can go and collect without, giving does not undermine the dignity of the person who is receiving.
Okay.
So when we look at philanthropy and the reparations movement, we believe that from an African philanthropy perspective, our task is to contribute towards building power for transformation, power for change. When we talk about building power, we imagine it in different tracks, but the starting point for us is narrative power. How do we invest in anchoring the reparations movement in a strong Pan-African philosophical and ideological grounding? I think when Akima was speaking, she mentioned Cabral, she mentioned Thomas Sankara. When Cabral talks about the liberation struggle, the African liberation struggle, he talks about it as the political expression of a culture. And he talks about the struggle as the act of reclaiming not only our identity, but our dignity. And he talks about the struggle as the process of re-Africanization, becoming he expresses the imperative of becoming the new, the new humanity, the new, man, the new woman, the new African, who was undermined under the harm that slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism continues to do today. So we think that this movement of reparations need to have a strong ideological and philosophical grounding in the best thoughts that we can recite here from Nkrumah, Cabral, Fanon, all our prophets, if we are to put it that way. Chinua Achebe, I think I was in a conversation yesterday where, if you paraphrase Chinua Achebe, when he's saying we are not Africa's children. We are its parents, because the Africa we want is not yet born. And the process that we are engaged in now is midwifing that Africa we want, which aligns again with the reference to Cabral. So we believe that in anchoring this movement in a strong Pan-African and philosophical foundation, we need to invest in African culture, storytelling, our poets, our cinema, our artists, our painters. Like, we need that anchoring. So when we talk about narrative power as the entry point, it's really it's really about that, because without that, we run the risk of this being yet another technical engagement with the question of development. And again, I think colleagues will remember Samora Machel saying that if what the post-colonial governments do through education is to create engineers and doctors and nurses, it will have failed, because the colonial project actually had the ability to do that, to create those technicians. So for us, what is the liberatory aspect and element that comes in with education? So there's a lot that we can say, but this aspect of anchoring the reparations movement in a strong Pan-African philosophical and ideological grounding is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so let's again practice breathing, and let's breathe in that aspiration and vision for grounding ourselves in Pan-Africanism, and breathe out the intention to make it come true. Tássia, coming to you. Earlier, you mentioned your role in philanthropy, the last 5 years of being in philanthropy. And in our conversation yesterday, you kind of named like what's missing. One of the things that's missing is audacity. Audacity. So I want you to share with us that connection that's missing between audacious ways in which philanthropy can relate to reparations.
Thank you, Noel. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about the Brazilian philanthropic landscape, and then what lessons we can learn from that to reflect upon the relation between philanthropy and reparations. So philanthropy, to me, in Brazil lives in a state of illusion. For instance, 80% of national philanthropy in Brazil is focused on education. The foundations, they devote themselves to discover, and I don't use this term lightly, the key of ending inequality through education. Much like the great navigators, they call themselves discoverers of a new world that had always existed and was known by its true owners. So these philanthropic organizations claim, and they strongly believe that they will find the reason why Brazilians' educational indicators remain poor, despite we having a vast and really complex and well-funded public education system. Even though education is historically a primary issue for Black movements who represent the majority of the population, these foundations rarely engage in dialogue with social movements. This has been changing a lot over the past years due to the assassination of Marielle Franco, who had a great impact, due to the strengthening of the political identity of Black women in Brazilian society, which has a direct relation to the Black Women's March that we've talked about earlier today, and also due to international contexts such as the assassination of George Floyd. But despite their recent engagement in racial equality, they rarely do grant funding. They almost never, when they do, they almost never do long-term or institutional. And most philanthropic organizations in Brazil are family-based. And these families, they almost always descend from large landowners who later became bankers, and who we can easily trace to coffee and sugarcane plantations and slavery in Brazil. So, as they possess themselves as discoverers, they refuse to recognize themselves as part of the system that produces and sustains inequality. These institutions, they themselves see themselves and position themselves as transparent, as neutral actors, supposedly capable of solving inequality from the outside. So when I think about the connection between philanthropy and reparation, I like what Hakima brought to us today, reparations as world making. When I look at that, I only see the possibility of philanthropy and of these resources truly supporting the reparations movement in a way that is benefit to them, to their interests, to talk about a little bit about what Jasmine brought to us. When the organization stops to pretending to be a neutral, external hand that holds the answers to transformation, and instead acknowledge itself as part of the web of relations historically implicated in what it seeks to change. So what am I saying, right? So I'm going to tell you a little history to illustrate that. We have this huge banking family in Brazil, and they have famous sons that went out and became filmmakers and even got an Oscar this year, right? And they are great philanthropists. And they're brothers, right? And one of them is married to a woman who has this huge radio communication station that holds podcasts and stuff like that. And she decided recently to investigate her family past. And she discovered that she had some slave owners in her genealogy, right? And what she made from that, she made a little podcast, she made a little episode telling this story and trying to find some redemption for herself and her family. Whenever they are eventually acknowledging these families, their relation to this legacy and this violence in our past, they are doing that to self-serve them, right? And this is not implicating their philanthropy work in any way. I think, yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank
you so much.
I'll leave it there.
Yes. Thank you. Let's breathe in the audacity we must all possess to imagine what we deserve from systems, from structures, from each other, from self. And let's breathe out the audacity to build our practice into embodiment and culture. So we are at 20 minutes. All right, we are in the last 20 minutes of our time together in this conversation. So bringing it back to you again, Hakima, you mentioned earlier the queering of the conversation, whether it's reparations or beyond, right? And so I'm gonna help us imagine what a queered Africa and African futures for all of us would look like.
Well, that's off script, but I'm going for it. Okay, there's one thing I'm going to do because I started it. I put Cabral and Sankara into the space And I love them.
Yes.
But we haven't put any of the women
Yes,
or gender
yes.
expansive people into the space.
I do.
Amaata, okay, that's a good start. Mekatilili from here in Kenya. Winnie Mandela.
Yes.
Bibi Titi from Tanzania. Tenjiwe Mtinso from South Africa. Asata Shakur,
Yes,
who
yes.
we just lost.
Yes.
Kwesi Balagun, who many of you may not know, but he is a very important person. Thank you. Okay, who else wants to?
Yes.
Audrey. Erica then.
Well, I think just to shout out, I do think it would be useful not to just think in terms of thinkers of the past, that we can, idealize their novel people that you've mentioned, some of many of them I don't know, but, it'd be good to also think of contemporary thinkers that we can also engage in their work and, and allow them to be part of the canon that we hold on to as we think about an African future. And also, as I've got the mic, let me just say that I think it's really important for all of us to accept that we might not all agree. And that one way of contemplating a future Africa is to clash, actually, and to challenge ideas. Because, some of the ideas, and let me just be explicit, the ideas around an African, Pan-African ideology, for me, sounds extremely singular. And I think we need to allow ourselves the opportunity to fight it out. And all movements that have tried to move forward have had to say, okay, what do we take and what do we leave? And I think we need to try and have a spirit of doing that so that our conversations and movement building are really rich and help us all kind of move forward.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. Back to you, Hakima.
I fully agree. I think we need to bring forward that canon of knowledge that we have at this present time with all of our thinkers. And we can throw names in the same way to honor what we're learning, the knowledges that we're building. And I would also say around the futures, I think the S is important. Futures in the plural, feminisms in the plural.
That's right.
Africanness in the plural. I don't think you can do that in English, but whatever. If we borrow from our comrades across the way, the indigenous folks of the Americas who talk about another world where many worlds are possible. Yes. That is absolutely what we need to build. Yes. Not only to clash, because I think, and I do think that there's something generative in tension and in conflict and us coming to ideas in different ways, but also to make possible the room where all of us have our dignity and our lives and are upheld in different ways. I'm going to go to the question of philanthropy just because I want to add to what Tássia and Jasmine were saying. Philanthropy comes from that place that we talk about where the global social structure of colonialism created a set of rules, institutions, and norms that are protected by coercion and violence and that ensure advantage to the global north and to white bodies. That's where philanthropy comes from. The wealth that it was accumulated was extracted from our lands, from our bodies, from our resources, all of that. So when we talk about philanthropy, even though it's framed as a kind of kindness, I think it's really important that we acknowledge the origin. The origin is theft. And the theft, we are the ones from whom it was stolen.
That's right.
So I'm going to go back to, I mentioned I grew up in this black nationalist house, so Malcolm X was very important. He started his speeches with brothers and sisters, friends, and I see some enemies. In fact, I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we had an audience this large and didn't realize that there were some enemies present. I think that distinction is very important, and reframing it from this moment, if we have siblings, brothers and sisters, folks that we love, the reasons that we're fighting, the people that we tremble with indignation because of their oppressions. We have comrades, the people we trust with our lives, the people who are ready to go when we say go. We have friends, and these people are people that may come along. You don't have everything in common with your friend, and that's okay. You accept them and you collaborate when you can collaborate. And there are enemies of justice, reparation, and liberation. And I want to say that in the context of philanthropy, because philanthropy is a big net. In philanthropy, I would say there are friends, not comrades, not siblings. There are friends and there are enemies. And I'm not talking here about the individuals, but rather as a way to analyze these institutions and their potential. And I say the enemies part because it's only a tiny slither of philanthropy that actually goes to progressive movements. There are huge swaths of philanthropy that go against reparative justice, against climate justice, against feminisms, against economic justice, against disability justice. So even in this moment, when I think many folks are feeling this withdrawal of funding, it's not just a withdrawal, it's also being reallocated. And it's being allocated to the agendas that are against the agendas of justice. So for me, philanthropy can be a tactic, but it can't be the strategy. And again, we have to remember that these institutions are built from the same how we are repairing from. So as a friend, what can philanthropy do? I think someone used the word infiltration. And I think that is an important tactic. But even as we do that, we have to ask ourselves, who are we accountable to? Who are we taking orders to? For it to be a good infiltration strategy, you have to be taking orders from somewhere else. Are we doing that, and how are we doing that well? I don't know how many of us are aware of this moment in the US where philanthropy is being targeted by this regime. So there's a lot of dog whistling around DEI, immigration, Palestine, and generally the left. And they're threatening new laws, and because they love executive orders, apparently, at this moment, executive orders, and these investigations have already started. But most private and so-called progressive philanthropy has responded by anticipating compliance and by putting in new regulations based on laws that don't yet exist. So what that means in practical terms is that they're defunding Black feminisms, Black causes, they're defunding indigenous sovereignty, a free Palestine, climate justice, and even anti-fascism. Many of them are already running scared of some of these words. You can't use the words anymore to be funded. But we also see that philanthropy funds governments and then runs fast from repression. And the US, it's happening now in the US, but it's not new. We saw it in India, we saw it in Egypt. And rather than putting up a good fight, they're willing to throw so many folks under the bus. So philanthropy as a friend is not a very loyal friend. I say all this and then I'm in philanthropy. But we set up the Black Feminist Fund to, as I said, to make an intervention. And we set it up not as a permanent institution because we know that reparative justice is dismantling this distributive system that maintains racial capitalism and maintains the wealth of philanthropy. What we refuse to do is compromise on the value, life, and dignity of Black women and gender-expansive people. And we do that by speaking up, by providing 8-year core funding, and by doing our grant making in a participatory way. And recently we announced that we doubled our commitment. We're giving 35 million to Black feminist movements. And that's fantastic. But we got 2,000 applications. We're only able to fund 54 groups. And what's beautiful is when we do these open calls, we get these annoyed emails from Black feminist groups around the world saying, why didn't you fund us? And why that's beautiful is that it feels then that Black feminist movements feel entitled to us, feel like this mechanism is for us. And that's important because I don't think many of these private philanthropy get annoyed emails. And what we respond is to acknowledge that it shouldn't be our decision, even though it's a participatory decision, and that it has real impact. It has real material impact. And I know that my survival depends on the very work of all the organizations that we even had to say no to. So just to end, because I know time, but philanthropy won't save us. It's not the path to our liberation. It never has been, as Jasmine was explaining. At best, philanthropy's role in reparative justice is to redistribute resources from a place of repair and solidarity. And that would mean these resources are not conditional, they're not transactional, they're not performative, but rather they're abundant, untethered, and sustained. Anything less is really not enough, not even from a friend.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Thank you. Let's definitely breathe all of that in and hold it within ourselves and hold that intention and breathe out the possibility of making it happen. Jasmine, yesterday you were talking about you were sharing your curiosity rather about philanthropy and wondering if reparations as a conversation exists in philanthropy, and then is it even prioritized? Does it exist? And if it exists, is it prioritized? And then what does it look like to make reparations an agenda item? You want to share more about that?
Sure. So I want to underscore a point that Hakima made around the origins of philanthropy, because I think it's important to ground ourselves in the reality of that. Philanthropy is the wealth after the luxury. So after the jets, after the multiple homes, the offshore accounts, then you have philanthropy, right? So philanthropy is inherently structured to preserve elite comfort, not to dismantle elite control. So I'm just echoing what you said, Hakima, because the truth of the matter is you got to get what you can get while you can get it, but don't expect it to free you or be the vehicle to your liberation. I also want to make the point that philanthropy is the afterlife of racial capitalism, which I think Hakima also pointed out, but I just needed to say that again because I think the title, the word philanthropy, has this very benevolent and generous connotation, but it comes at the cost of our ancestors. The other point that I wanted to pick up on that Hakima was pointing out was accountability. Because when I watch these moments where white nationalists, I'm going to use the US as an example, white nationalists who commit vicious crimes, massacres, and then they get a GoFundMe that like gets millions of dollars. And I'm just wondering, where are our people when we need money to be committed to a cause? And I'm not saying that everyday Black person that's trying to get by. I'm talking about the Black wealthy, the Black elite. I think there's a conversation that needs to happen in those spaces around who they're accountable to, because it's a shame that in some regards, our Black movements are dependent on white philanthropies. The last thing I want to say, and I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I want to circle back to the point around like how we trade our radical imaginations for aligning to philanthropy's criterias. It's true that philanthropy can make movements more visible, but they also make them less dangerous and less radical. So we need to stay dangerous and we need to stay radical. Mm-hmm. I think that's where I'm gonna end.
Thank you. Let's breathe in that radical imagination and breathe out our commitment to radical doing. And speaking of radical and imagination, Jasmine, you took me back to last year and Mia Moore-Motley, just naming her, bringing her into the space. Just wanted to name her, actually. She belongs here because her words and her truth and her leadership matter a lot now and moving into the future too. It's so connected to the past, to the present and future. Thank you for everything she does and others like her do, including all of you here, all of us here. I'm going to bring the question actually to Tássia, and then we'll close with you, Briggs. I think it's okay for this, for patriarchy to go last. Tássia, over to you. You placed an intention in the space in our conversation yesterday about audacity and connectivity between global movements. And would you want to talk about that with us?
Thank you, Noel. So I want to start saying that I really believe that my survival depends on the work done by the movements. So, and I really believe that movements move history. They shape the course of time. And they have always done so without depending on resources of philanthropy. So acknowledging that, I think is the first step when engaging in a conversation between philanthropy and movements. So that the power balance is a little bit shattered and not defined by the legacy of this money and this theft. In that sense, and I believe that in a lot of ways, philanthropy needs movements way more than movements need philanthropy. And in what way do I say they need them? They need them in order to avoid becoming a mere echo of an obsolete past, of charitable white hands. If they don't engage in the conversation with the movement, with movements acknowledging that they are the ones leading the historical process of transformation, they will become even more obsolete. So, and I do want to resonate with another thing that Hakima brought to us. Philanthropy is a means, it's not an end. I do believe it's tactic, not a strategy. So less time should be spent in philanthropy trying to guarantee a certain notion of impact or development. And let's leave the political agenda, the political work to those who have led social transformation for decades. So this is the audacity that I'm trying to carry with me whenever I am doing this work. Let's focus on mobilizing resources. This is our role, right? Understanding ourselves as infiltrated agents that know who they respond to. right? Not leaders or protagonists. I think this is the essential plot twist, the essential twist that philanthropy must take. But this demands courage. And as I've tried to infuse this philanthropic strategy with the spirit of the movement, I've repeatedly encountered fear. And I want to bring a Brazilian quilombola thinker, Nego Bispo, who says to the table, to our circle, who says that the greatest characteristic of colonial power is fear. Fear of the cosmos, fear of the other, fear of the infinite darkness of difference in constant motion, fear. And he describes that since this is the center of colonial power and colonial mindset, therefore comes this obsession with knowing and controlling everything and discovering and demanding impact and a certain notion of development. He calls this cosmophobia and says that counter-coloniality offers another path, one of openness to encounter, to relation. I've often been told that I was trying to turn philanthropy into Black women's movement. Maybe I was. That I didn't understand the limits or the nature of philanthropic work. But what these words conceal is that they're, like Jasmine and Hakima both brought to us today, is that there is nothing natural about how philanthropy is structured. The orange is theft. It was forged in the same furnace that birthed the racial and gender structures of violence that we still face. So I'm just underlining this. It's not only part of the system, it's one of its central gears. So if it does not confront its own natural nature or oranges, it will never be capable of truly engaging with movements. And for that, courage is required. I will just finish.
Yes, please.
Just 1 minute. So, when I talk about courage, I don't wish to romanticize courage. I just want to make that remark. Not as a symbol of an endless triumph battle, but to grasp its depth. There's courage in silence, there's courage in loss, there's courage in strategic retreat, there's courage in the daily negotiations that walk the thin line between life and death. And I place my bet in this courage, born from the movements, to inspire different philanthropic practices.
Thank you, Tássia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Breathing in courage and breathing out global movement solidarity. And Briggs, we are coming to you. You have a question for Briggs? Closing question for Briggs?
I think Briggs doesn't need a question. He knows how to close us up.
Well, I think I can just go back to where I started, which is around narrative. One of the areas of work for Trust Africa is actually narratives on philanthropy. And we are partnering with groups like Your Giving Tuesdays, World Giving Library. I mean, we convened the African Philanthropy Conference, the Pan-African and Feminist Philanthropies Indaba. And I think adding the S is very important. So when we say philanthropy, I think I started by saying it's not a homogeneous term or phenomenon even. So for us, we really seek to emphasize philanthropy as expressed in the African reality in terms of what has sustained our communities. So it even becomes synonymous with solidarity. And I think, as I said earlier, we don't talk of philanthropy as money. We're actually worried that classical notions or definitions of philanthropy privilege money over other forms of giving, giving of our time, giving of our space, giving of our networks, giving of our talents. So I hear everything that's coming out. We have a big book out there, huge one, called Helping to Give, Giving to Help, which really captures a lot of these notions of African ways of giving. And in fact, our recent compendium that's on the World Giving Library now is 20 stories of giving from across 20 different communities, including what happens in Nigeria when a woman gives birth and there's philanthropy around you in terms of people showing up to support you. So I'm just putting that as a little bit of, I guess, a qualification to say when we talk about philanthropy and African philanthropy in particular, it's not the same thing as Rockefeller, let's say. But I would think Black Feminist Fund philanthropy is also not what we are talking about. Trust Africa philanthropy is different. So I think the narratives are really important, and we need to reclaim that narrative. Philanthropy is not just money, it's not just the giving of money, and it's not something foreign to Africans and imposed on Africans. The philanthropy that, sort of the one that we are hearing here, I think it even owes reparations to the continent. So we need to think about what does reparative philanthropy look like. Then the last point that I'll say as I switch off the microphone is on, again, it's on narratives, but to say some of these terms, when we hear them, it can even be a term like Black feminist, it can be a term like liberal capitalism, it can be, all these terms, there's a way that they trigger certain things. But I think for us, when we talk about our Pan-African philosophy, we are really speaking to the notion that our liberation is bound together as Africans here at home and those in the diaspora. So we even talk about global Africa. And these are not new words. These are words that were expressed by some of the people we mentioned here. When Nkrumah says the liberation of Ghana is meaningless unless it's connected to the liberation of the whole continent. And in this reparations struggle, this struggle of reparations for Africans at home is meaningless unless it's connected to the struggle for the reparations of Africans abroad in the diaspora. That's an extremely important point. So I think it's, yes, iron sharpens iron, but it's important for us to clash on the substance of what these terms mean. So if we are clashing on the point of saying reclaiming our dignity, reclaiming our story, reclaiming our future, which is what, for us, that's the substance of those terms, then we have a conversation that we need to explore. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Big round of applause again for our panelists, Hakima, Jasmine, Tássia, and Briggs. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for spending this 1 hour plus with us.